If you ever taken a look at Scandinavia, you'd notice that it mostly consists of hills, mountains, forests, and more of the same. Breaking up this rough monotony are a profusion of fjords, lakes and rivers. Thanks to these waterways, Nordics could always travel between 2 points much quicker than by land. This would give rise to a hardy, seafaring culture that would persist to this day. Nordic history has always been driven by the technological and societal innovations tied to travel by water. Finland, for example, is sometimes called the land of 1,000 lakes. Finland has approximately 187,000 lakes, making up 10% of its total land area. This was very useful for its primordial population, whose economy was entirely centered on hunting and gathering. When you've harvested all the berries in an area, or hunted all the animals, you had to move on. During winter, you could easily travel over snow and ice using skis and sleighs. Nordic winter transportation is a video for another day, however. During summer, they used boats. The earliest Nordic watercrafts were dugout canoes. They are some of the most common archaeological finds, and were used since the Stone Age. In some isolated areas, they were used up until recently, and I wouldn't be surprised if they still are. They are made from cutting down a tree, usually oak or deal, clearing away all the branches and barks, splitting it in two, and hollowing it out. The work was done with axes and chisels, and fire was sometimes used for hollowing them out. The same basic tools and techniques would be used well after the Viking Age. The boats were typically 4 to 5 meters long and 60 centimeters wide. The oars were usually made from pine, which is softer and easier to work with than oak. This oar discovered in Karelia was made from moose pine and measured 138 centimeters in length. Whilst these craft were rudimentary, they did make trading and hunting much easier. Canoes made it easier to transport products back to camp without carrying it. Imagine having to club a seal and then carry it all the way back home. The seals are pretty heavy, after all. In the later parts of the Stone Age, some dugouts were built with outriggers, which improved their stability and carrying capacity. Outriggers are these console sections built on the side of the ship. One excavated dugout had boards added to it in the bottom. You might call it a rudimentary deck. This further improved its carrying capacity and implied that it was built for several crewmen. In Scania, ancient men further improved their dugouts by adding pieces of wood to the sides, preventing water from entering the boat and making it more seaworthy. Some boats may have had decorations. Archaeologists found a wooden moose head in Lehtijärvi, which they believe was mounted in the prow of a canoe. This might be the oldest figurehead in history. With the sea as their highway, the boat formed a vital part of ancient Nordic culture. Cave paintings from the Stone Age frequently depict the early watercraft. The most famous examples can be found at Evenhus near Trondheim, where a collection of carvings depict a distinct type of craft. These curved canoes have sharp, rising ends, and one seems to have handles, likely used for beaching it. The depicted crafts bear a striking resemblance to the Arctic umiak, whose design has remained unchanged to this day. The umiak is constructed by stretching and sewing seal skins over a wooden framework of ribs and stringers. Unlike the dugouts, which had round bottoms, these skin canoes were flat. The boats were used for fishing and hunting maritime mammals like the seal, which formed a major part of the ancient Finnish diet. They were likewise used in trading. Whilst most trade goods from the time have turned to dust, evidence points to amber being used as some form of currency. Amber originates from Denmark and the Baltics, but amber items from the Stone Age have also been found in Finland, and probably got there through trade. These include rings, buttons, and discs, many with holes for use in necklaces and armbands. Amber was the gold of this era, and would drive the northern peoples into trading with areas far, far beyond their homes. Amber has even been discovered in the crypts of the Egyptian pharaohs. But the canoes couldn't possibly have traveled that far. They were only able to travel in calm waters along shores and rivers. The farthest a Stone Age boat has traveled seems to have been 300 to 400 meters from the coast. Their main disadvantage was that they couldn't enter the ocean. Whilst there were attempts to make them more seaworthy, like the outrigger, deck and sideboards, further innovation was necessary for long-distance trading. It was likely this lust for wealth and adventure which drove the ancient northerners into maritime innovation. The introduction of metal drove shipbuilding innovation to new heights. You now had bronze weapons and tools, but to make these you need to go out and find copper and tin. By 1500 BC, Northerners made regular trading expeditions to Britain, Ireland, and possibly even France and the Mediterranean. This economical and social expansion seems to have given rise to violent use of boats, as we'll soon find out. The cultural importance of ships is evident in the amount of rock carvings. They depict flotillas of broad-beamed, open boats, with keels and gunnels that project like beaks fore and aft. Some of the craft are small and plain, whilst others are elaborately detailed and feature prows with animal heads, or stylized depictions of the crew, who are either paddling the craft or waving their weapons. This design is called the Hjortspring boat, named after Hjortspring bog in Denmark, where a ship of this design was excavated in 1921. Whilst the sample originates from the early Iron Age, the sophistication of its craftsmanship indicate that the boat building methods are older than the boat itself, further evidenced by the rock carvings. Interestingly enough, historians believe that the boat was a large war canoe, taken as a trophy and sunk in the bog as an offering. It is 18 meters long and 2 meters wide amidships, giving great space for men and cargo. The hull consists of 7 pieces of lime wood, sewn together with cord made from lime bark, spruce root or rawhide. Pitch or resin was used for caulking and coating the seams. Nowadays we'd use metal nails for securing boards, and cotton or oakum for caulking. Caulking is filling in the gaps between the planking to prevent leakage. The hull was attached to a thin rib made from hazel branches. These ribs were spaced 1 meter apart and were attached to cleats in the planks. This unique method would persist into the 10th century AD. The ribs are spanned with thwarts, which are benches for the crews. They are angled in such a way to maximize the power of the downward paddle thrust. There were 10 thwarts total, supporting 20 paddlers, 10 on each side, and the boat was fashioned with a steering oar. The boat has a bottom plank in the form of a long dugout log, which acts as its keel. In modern boats, a keel is a board running vertically with a hull, and is vital for balance. 2 additional planks called strakes are attached on both sides to fashion the hull. This made it more seaworthy, and allowed it to sit high in the water. The distinct beaks on each end were used for bracing both ends of the boat. The Hjortspring boat is a clear evolution of the skin and log boats. It embodies their strength, lightness and flexibility, which would become the hallmarks of Scandinavian shipbuilding. Over the next 700 years, these qualities would become apparent and improved upon. Boats with hulls that were sewn together, rather than nailed, would continue to be used well into the Renaissance. This 16th century illustration depicts a Sami producing a sewn boat, with similar techniques as the Hjortspring. Even though they lacked metalworking, the Sami were well known for producing high-quality sewn boats, which they often sold to foreign merchants. In 1138, the Norwegian king Sigurd Slembidjaken ordered 2 such boats. Snorri Sturluson called them skiffs, and said that they were held together with sinews, without any nails, and that they were rowed by 12 men on each side. In size and speed, these vessels might have rivaled the boats that we'll talk about next. By the 4th century AD, the Norse had developed the clinker construction. This was a boat building method where the edges of the hull planks overlap each other. The word stems from clinch or clench, meaning to fasten together. This shipbuilding method was distinct from the Roman technique, which was based on connecting planks with joints. Despite its kinda clunky appearance, it looks like there would be a lot of water resistance. Clinker hulls are lighter than earlier and later alternatives. It made the hull more flexible, making it well suited for the hard waters of the North Sea. The disadvantage of clinker built was that you couldn't build the ships very high. Our best example of an early clinker is the Nydam ship, discovered in 1863. The Nydam ship was used for war, and military equipment was discovered inside. Just like the Hjortspring boat, it was likely offered as sacrifice, sometime between 350 to 400 AD. It is an open rowing boat measured at 23.5 meters long, 3.5 meters wide, and 1.2 meters deep. It's built entirely of oak, and like early examples, it has a bottom plank instead of a keel. The stem and stern pieces are attached to this bottom plank. The hull consists of 10 planks attached to the stem and stern, and reinforced by a scarfed gunwale. The planks are made from a single piece of oak, a primitive concept, surely, though it attests to the skill of the shipwright. Unlike the Hjortspring boat, which has its planking sewn together, the hull of the Nydam ship is riveted with iron nails over small, square rows on the inside of the hull. This was a major innovation that would persist throughout the Viking Age and last to our modern day. The ribs are hewn from timbers rather than branches and are lashed to the hull via cleats. The ribs are supported by 15 thwarts, spaced 1 meter apart, and supported by a series of props. The next major innovation was that this ship supported 30 oars rather than paddles. Rowing enables a ship to go faster, whilst being less exhaustive than paddling. The oars were attached to barb-shaped rowlocks across the gunwales. The ship was steered by a large, paddle-shaped rudder at the stern. To summarize its improvements from the Bronze Age ship, the early Iron Age boat was stronger and faster. However, the Nordic ship did not yet have a mast. That doesn't mean they weren't seaworthy. The Angles and Saxons used these vessels to invade England. These trips would have been dangerous. Since the vessel still lacked a keel, it lacked strength and stability. It would be prone to hogging or swamping, and many Saxons likely ended up as shark bait. It would take until the 7th or 8th century for the keel to be developed. The Kvalsund ship, discovered in 1920, was built around the year 700 and is the oldest northern vessel found with a keel. Just like the previous two examples, it seems to have been offered in a bog. Although its basic construction was essentially the same as the Nydam boat, being clinker built with iron rivets, having thwarts and oarlocks, even a bottom plank, the Kvalsund ship had a keel added to it. Another innovation was the removal of the steering oar in favor of a fixed rudder on the starboard side of the stern. The rudder is triangular in shape and would have been considerably easier to steer than with an oar. The word starboard even stems from the Norse word styr, meaning steering. This early example sparked a Nordic tradition of always mounting the rudder on the right side, thus the name starboard, steering side. We can see that the evolution of these boats was driven by societal changes, but in turn, they also drove them. Stone Age men needed a fast way to move around, trade and transport, so they made canoes. When they needed to travel and trade farther, they made larger and more stable boats. This increased expansion and trade seemingly gave rise to more conflicts, facilitating the construction of warships. The Nydam boat was clearly built for war, and its construction allowed the Saxon warriors to migrate across the ocean and invade England. The Nordic ship design would culminate with Viking longship, and that too would drive an explosive period of war and trade, further changing society, and further evolving the Northern shipbuilding. But that's for a future video. If you enjoy the content I produce, consider supporting me monetarily on Patreon. You'll find the link in the video description. Otherwise, please give the video a like and a comment, so that YouTube will show it to more potential viewers. And why not share it with a friend? Cheers.